great. I think I'll start by just agreeing with you about anything to stop the march of Didcot would be great. I grew up in that area. I went to school in Didcot and nearby, and it's absolutely swamped the area. So I'm fully
the success of science there.
Exactly. But what I have seen is the way that the developments there, Milton Park and the science area, have completely transformed a very rundown, very derelict town into something that is now quite economically prosperous. So the opportunity for this to happen in Havering is something that I'm excited about, and I look forward to this committee getting a grip of. I've got a list of questions, but also some are sort of recommendations I don't think you'd be able to answer now, but I think I would like to see in future presentations. Starting with something you just mentioned, you talked about the site being modular, being built and then brought into the site, and the possibility for that to develop an industry in South Havering. Yeah. Where are you building the modular units before you bring them into Havering? Are they being built in Havering and transported to the site, or are they being built elsewhere and then brought into the site?
Our aspiration in Havering, and it starts a whole economy around that. And I think that's key to our commitment, because it's going to, in terms of this being an example of very sustainable green data centres, the idea is it creates an economy. There's going to be more and more data centre demand around the UK. So you'll then be exporting, once our data centre campus is built out, the industry remains in Havering and it becomes something you guys export, potentially even globally.
Train to China. No, absolutely. We would like to build, data centers and edge data centers, as well as the sort of hyperscaler. That's our ambition. Certainly, the design. I've been meeting and working with CME, who are very excited. I can't say we've got a factory site, but that's definitely about. This is an asset that requires a lot of technology that's always being updated. So if you can have and resilience of data and resilience of infrastructure is only going to increase. We haven't even got to things like cyber attacks, etc. So our ambition is very much around that, to do as much of it as we can and leave a legacy and build high value jobs. And so, I mean, we haven't done it. It's the great work of the Catapult in Stevenage, but I've seen firsthand high value jobs by upskilling people in Stevenage, and I'm on Didcot first. We've developed around Didcot, so again, I know how deprived it is. So it really is about taking people out of low value jobs in retail and trying to upskill them. And I'm not saying we can do it, but we've worked in those ecosystems and can certainly join the dots.
And for us, in terms of construction costs, etc., if we're having to pay to ship units down from, say, the northeast and do road closures through several different police authorities, it doesn't make sense for us. So the right solution for the local community and for us is to have
and it may also be that that we achieve so much in data centres, but it's green hydrogen. I mean, there's lots of technologies here with the renewables that we're bringing in, hydrogen cells. The hydrogen ambitions of Ford is an obvious crossover. So there's lots of synergies, and we're very passionate to try and make something happen like that.
Going to rely quite identified a factory site yet, but you're going to need to have identified that site and constructed the factory before you begin here. So if you're looking to get planning permission passed by the end of this year, I think it'd be very worthwhile this committee understanding where you're constructing this factory and where you're bringing the units from, because that will really impact the traffic flow.
We identified one site down by the Freeport, down by Ford, Dagenham, which is an Segro control. But I agree with you. That's definitely something we need to do, and that's the whole. We sort of go from all the battle of the battle and the type of getting planning to then going to delivery, which is a completely different skill set. So. But I think there's the Catapult at CME have a presence for manufacturing. So, we'd be looking to lean into that. And the one advantage we have is there's quite a lot of the initial work is actually preparing the site. There's only a very relatively small data center in the first sort of 18 months, then it does ramp up.
Another important part of your presentation was the generation of green electricity, so your solar and your wind and so on. But I didn't see that on the initial layout. So yes, where's that going to be?
That's off-site. So we're building the infrastructure to allow. There's already just under 500 megawatts of applications which have been submitted to grid for solar farms which are adjacent to Worley, but currently Worley does not have the capacity and enough space on site to expand to facilitate these developments. So we're almost being like an extension lead that comes out of Worley, and all then the renewables will plug into our infrastructure back into Worley and back onto the grid.
It's not necessarily your site.
It's not on our site, but we do the infrastructure works, which facilitates those green energy projects coming forward. And it's worth saying that Worley, National Grid have a plan at the moment for infrastructure development across the entire country, and Worley is not listed. So it's entirely reliant on private investment, which is the 113 million that's going.
Just on that then, and forgive me if I got this confused then. So you're not going to be generating the green power yourself, but those figures are being used to say that this site is carbon neutral or carbon negative.
Carbon neutral in operation is what we're saying. We also have a part of the master plan and an area allocated for green energy generation on site, because there's a number of different technologies we're exploring. That allocation, we might not have the detail for a number of years, but we're building in that infrastructure.
But just to be clear, so what we facilitate is the Worley's run out of land, so we facilitate the land, and then we also fund the grid import, which is what it requires. The irony is that we will actually take a lot of it through a private wire directly into our scheme. So actually, although we actually increase the import, we'll actually be wanting to have a lot of it, and we'll only be giving it to the grid at off-peak times. So. But all of these the solar and the wind are not in our ownership. We don't control it, but they will happily private wire to us because they want to just sell.
Part of my concern is that obviously the numbers of this site will generate X numbers. It's not going to generate green electricity. Your neighbours are going to generate it, and you're going to purchase it off of them. And I think that's an important distinction for the public, in that we are not in this committee going to be approving a green power station in Havering. We're going to be approving a data centre that buys lots of green power from neighbours nearby.
I think the easiest way actually to think about it is not think about us buying it. You think about it's a data centre that's very green in terms of, and we'll go into it in subsequent sessions, but looking at the solar, looking at the fact that we're using the waste heat for farming rather than just pumping it into the atmosphere. There's lots of great green things we're doing in the data centre itself, but I think what's really important is that we're creating the infrastructure and the connection for all of this green power to come in.
I think that's good.
And then what happens to that is, we could buy it, it could be sold to the grid.
And you're right, I totally agree. And we have, that's part of when we went to Rupert Warren. We didn't just go to them, it was a long process, but we provided all that information on where these sites are. So it's not just us as developers saying, oh, there's 1.2 gigawatts. So we can happily, quite right as you asked for it, provide that supporting information. But where you're right is they're not consented. Now, looking at precedent and the acceleration for renewables, they're very likely to get consented. But I think we've identified 250 that's consented.
There's 250 that's consented, sorry. 250 megawatts that's consented, and there's just under 250 that is in the planning pipeline, so they're being developed.
The reason it's so important is obviously, you mentioned we don't want to greenwash, and I believe and trust you that you don't want to, but a really key part of that is just making sure those headline figures are accurate. And I don't want the public to be under the impression that Digital Reef is going to be generating green electricity on a site, because you're not. What you're doing is good and it's green, but you're not generating green energy.
The only thing we do plan, I agree with them, the only thing we plan to do is we do plan to generate green hydrogen, because we will be able to, but we need the renewables that you're questioning to do that. So, but I totally agree. We need to make that very clear and honest and transparent to the public, so, and the press, etc.
Building on from that question then, what I would like to see when the plans come forward, we get a lot of presenters come in and they talk about it being carbon neutral in operation or carbon negative in operation. That's good. But what we really need to see is data around the embodied carbon as well, because that's one thing that people always miss.
Yeah.
And
it's number 8, isn't it, on the embodied carbon study, and everyone always misses it and focuses on the end bit.
It might be carbon negative even, but it might take you 100 years to offset the carbon used to construct the centre. So if we can see the embodied carbon data, that would be fantastic. I think the other thing that's really important as part of that is that we benchmark that against what would a traditional data centre achieve, so you have an understanding of how much better it is. Tied into that You've got your battery storage. I'm very pleased to see battery storage. We need a lot more of it, but battery storage in itself isn't necessarily green yet. We're still working towards getting. Yeah. We're getting towards greener batteries and so on. So as well as understanding the embodied carbon, it would be good just to see the impact of the environmental impact of the construction of those batteries and being brought in. I'm incredibly pleased to hear you talking about green hydrogen, because that's something that this country is really, really far behind on. And that's the actual answer, not more electric vehicles and batteries and so on. So
we were talking to the London Freeport about that, because if you look at Cadent and some of the work that they're doing in the Northeast, what's so brilliant is we all talk about the challenges in our homes, and you can switch green hydrogen into a gas supply very quickly. So you don't have to make any modifications to anybody's homes, to hospitals, to nursing homes, care homes. You just pump in the green hydrogen instead of the
it's much more
gas.
likely to be the answer, I think.
Definitely.
In the initial presentation, it talks about cycle provision. That's always good. Now, your day-to-day staff numbers are going to be quite low. First of all, I think that needs to be quite clear. I think a lot of the press has misreported that this is going to generate thousands of jobs for Havering. It will in the construction process, but it won't in the day-to-day operation process. It'll be a few dozen jobs. And obviously there's the circular economy around that, but we don't know the size of that yet. It means your cycle provision will probably be small, but cycle provision is pointless if people can't get there on their bikes to chain them up to the cycle racks in the first place. So I think what will be a really important conversation is that you guys connect with local cycle charities, the cycling lobby. We've got some very strong green networks in Havering, groups of residents that have got together, and I'm sure they would love to sit down with you and understand how these staff will actually get their bikes to your cycle provision, and perhaps some investment in cycling infrastructure wouldn't be missed. Also would be wanted.
We were already discussing that, looking at the route, particularly it goes across the M25 and how you get under on those tunnels, because there's the one that comes out to the back of the Thames Chase Forest, and actually with a very small capital expenditure to improve that link, that's a brilliant east-west link that goes entirely across our site and Thames Chase Forest, which is obviously a great amenity.
Just on the jobs, I totally agree with everything you said on the jobs. We've had a lot of time trying to work out. You're absolutely right about the on-site jobs. Construction jobs is really easy. We've been to Oxford Economics. We've gone to probably one of the most reputable researchers in the country, or probably global, because we knew we'd get a lot of, we'd have to justify this. And so we don't know. What we do know is from their report is it has the same impact as the Olympics did in Stratford in terms of jobs. But I totally agree with you. And we get very frustrated with some of the stuff that's flying around in the press, because it's we're trying to be honest and transparent as we can about it, but yeah, I totally agree.
And I think it's one of the really key points about our very special circumstances. And back to the original question about Greenbelt designation, and the fact we're not asking for this to be removed from the Greenbelt, because it's actually not a development that's residential or something that would cause a huge amount of people to come to and from the site daily. So that messaging is really important for us to get that correct.
Yeah, I think it's a positive and a negative. The realistic option is you might create 100 day-to-day jobs there. That's a planning positive because it's much lower traffic, but it's also a negative because it's not as big a benefit as some people are being led to believe. But
we want to see the benefit in it. We know the benefit across the UK will be massive, but that's not much good to someone who lives around the corner who wants to know what's in it for them, and that's what we've been battling with for 2 or 3 years. We do think there'll be massive benefits, but totally agree.
And that's why we're also working on refining the rates question and what the actual offer is, because if we spoke ages ago about the idea of potentially in Romford town centre having a digital skills drop-in, which was training and gave people, say, who'd been made redundant later in life, the ability to upskill and learn these digital skills and actually benefit from the digital economy, because the amount of people who actually work on site is a lower figure than we would like the positive impact to be in Havering.
Sorry. You're saying as a councillor for Romford town centre, like to see that in the presentation. I'll just ask one more question, then I'll hand over to others to finish. with this ecology site that we're setting up and the visitor centre and so on, as I say, Havering has some very well established ecologically minded groups of residents and community networks, and I know there's a couple of councillors in this room who could certainly make approaches to them on your behalf or with you to make sure they're involved in the process. I think I'd love to see those groups and that community owning the ecology on the site and getting involved with you. So please do, be open to that. I'll pass over to others, and then I've got some very left field ethics questions for later.
Yes.